What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think of the very interesting discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sit Down video. What's up, everybody? And we are back with yet another very interesting sit down video. And we're going to get in to another organized crime topic. And the talk of the mob genre lately is the new Netflix 3-part series, Get Gotti. This week it would premiere, and it is near the top of the Netflix charts. People are charged up about the new doc about how the federal government prosecuted John Gotti. One of the people on the show that I've gotten a lot of questions on is this individual, a woman called Andrea Giovino. Now, in the documentary, on many occasions, she refers to the Gambino crime family and her as, quote, us. She's also listed as a Gotti associate. Am I actually getting questions of, was she in the mafia? What was her connection to John Gotti? We're going to talk about all that and more. Who is Andrea Giovino? What is her association with the mafia? The story next on Sit Down Shorts. Andrea Giovino was actually born Andrea Silvestri, and she would be born in April of 1956. Now, Andrea Silvestri would grow up and live at 689 East 2nd Street between Avenue F and Ditmas Boulevard in Brooklyn. Now, according to Silvestri, she would say that her childhood was quite difficult. It wasn't that her family weren't good parents. They just both had major gambling issues. According to Andrea, she would say that her father was a mild-mannered guy and a truck driver, but he had a gambling problem. And the problem for Andrea was her and her siblings had to deal with not only the fact that her father had a gambling problem, but her mother had a gambling problem as well. Silvestri would say that money was scarce as she was a young child. And according to her, she was regularly instructed by her mother in the early morning hours to go out and steal from bakers and different people in the neighborhood to get food for their family. Now, before we go on, I want to make this very clear. This is one episode where, to me, we are going off a lot of what Andrea Giovino tells us. Now, to me, I think there's a lot of things about her early life that I don't think she would lie about. But we're going to get into some of the very interesting claims that she makes. And I really urge you, it's really your job to judge. I'm not saying that everything Andrea Giovino tells you is the truth, but I'm just going to tell you what she tells us. And we're going to use historical reference to see whether we believe it or not. I think there's one thing we can say about her appearance on the documentary is that we don't really know what her story is. We just try on this show to let you be the judge of that. Now, Silvestri would say that as a young adolescent, she would regularly see that her mother was not only a gambling addict, but she would also host illegal gambling and dice games out of their home. And by the mid 60s, she would actually, her mother, even be arrested for her crimes. Now, Silvestri would say that as a child, she would actually be a bit of a tomboy. She enjoyed playing stickball and other things in the area of Brooklyn that she lived in, and that really she was just a normal kid that was steal and was instructed by her mother to do criminal acts. Thus, as a young kid, I guess we can all say at one point we probably stole something, but she was urged from an early age to commit crimes. And one thing I've learned about Andrea Giovino is she was taught very early to be an opportunist. She was urged very early to go towards powerful men, use them for what they are, and we're going to talk about that. Now, I do want to get into kind of a sickening situation that Silvestri would talk about in a book that she would pen. Now, I will urge you, this is not a promotional tool for Andrea Giovino to sell her book, but if you're interested, I did include the book in the description. It's kind of interesting. I thought it was a good read, though I did have my certain expectations about it. Silvestri would say that as a child, she began working at a pastry shop in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn on 13th Avenue. She would talk about a sickening situation at one point where the owner of the store, who was an Italian man, essentially SA'd her at one point. She would go home and tell her family about it. And it was a real big problem. And it really kind of shaped, sadly, her childhood. And she began to realize things about men. By her late teens, Sylvester would discuss that she could take advantage of men. She had learned that stealing as a young child, it was okay to likely steal as an adult. And in essence, was she stealing from men literally? No. But she realized that her relationship with men could afford her a lot of nice things. And by this point in her 20s, Giovino was a good looking woman. Now, I know that again, between this show, I'm going to refer to her as Giovino and Silvestri. Her born name is Silvestri, but we'll refer to her as Giovino going forward. Giovino, by her early 20s, was a pretty woman. She was a blonde. She was working as a model. She was also regularly hanging out at different discos in the 70s. Keep in mind, the disco age in the late 70s was there, and many young men and women took advantage of that. Giovino would say that she would get a restaurant job in Manhattan and also did some modeling work on the side. But for her in the late 70s, a break would come. She would get a job as a waitress at an illegal card game in Brooklyn. This is where she would meet Frank Lino. Now, we have discussed Frank Lino in a video here if you want to learn more about his life. Frank Lino is what many would call, by the late 70s, a legend in Bensonhurst. He came from a family that has dominated the mafia. Everybody in Brooklyn knew who Frank Lino was. By this point, he was a made member in the Bonanno crime family, and he was very connected. Frank Lino had been a gang member since his early teens, and he was someone who I think left an indelible mark on Miss Giovino. Now, according to Giovino, she believed when she instantly met Frank Lino that he was significantly older than her. He was in his 40s. She was 21. She had kind of been under the impression that it was just a friendship, and she really didn't want a relationship with Frank Lino, according to her. However, what she realized is that Frank Lino was going to give her things. He was going to buy her gifts. He was going to take care of her. And according as well to her, her mother almost not forced her, but made it clear, hey, you want to date him. He's got a lot of money. He's prestigious. He can take care of you. So in essence, Andrea Giovino begins a sugar daddy, sugar baby type relationship with Frank Lino. The Giovino would say that they would hang out, but that for her, it was more of just a friendship, and she was there as a companion to Lino. Lino would buy her an SL convertible. He would buy her Rolexes. He would help her in any way that she needed. And again, what she was learning was being around powerful men, they were going to do things for her. Eventually, the relationship would fall apart, but I did want to talk about a wild statement that Giovino would make in regards to a problem that would arise in the relationship between her and Frank Lino. At one point, she would say that one of the major issues that she had was Lino's relationship that he had with Bruno and Delicato, who, as we know, was a major hothead and problem. According to Giovino, in an episode of I Married a Mobster on Discovery Channel, she would say that at one point, Bruno and Delicato came into a room that she was sleeping in, rooting around, asking for cocaine. At one point, Giovino would say, quote, I realized he was on top of me. I picked up the phone and bashed him in the fucking head. I started fighting like a wild tiger. Thank God my girlfriend came back at that time. She had heard me, and he jumped off of me and ran out of the back door of the house through the sliding door. I never told Frank Lino what happened till this day in that room. Never. Now, this is one of the real problems we have from Giovino, because in other conflicting statements, she has told a different story, and that she definitely told Frank Lino about what went on. Do I think she bashed Bruno and Delicato in the head with a phone? No, I don't. I don't think that happened. Bruno and Delicato was a lunatic. We all know that he was addicted to drugs at one point. It's likely that he definitely would have taken care of her, or not killed her, but he wouldn't have taken that and just ran away. Who knows? But she would say that that was one of the real problems that the relationship would have. Eventually, she would move on from Frank Lino, and Giovino would say she would meet an individual that was just a regular guy and was an investment banker in and around New York. However, again, Giovino would meet a man that would take care of her. He wouldn't treat her well. And she would say that he was the total opposite of the men she was dating, people like Frank Lino, and that he regularly would make fun of her and things due to the fact that she dated mobsters and he was a good guy and she was just a bit of a slut, that sort of thing. Eventually, that marriage would fall apart. And by 1983, Andrea Giovino was a single woman yet again. The good thing for her, though, was she got a healthy divorce settlement from the investment banker that she had married, and she was now living in Manhattan. She would then say by 1985, in and around that time, she was urged by a friend to come hang out at a nightclub called Club A in Manhattan. According to her, Club A was a haven for mobsters. And this is where she claims that John Gotti sent her and her friend Margot a bottle of champagne. Giovino would say that she then caught the eye of a person called Mark Ryder. Now, Mark Ryder, if you know anything about him, was a gigantic drug dealer and was close and knew John Gotti for years. I will likely do a video on the haunts and life of Mark Ryder at some point. We're not going to go into his life today. But Giovino would say that when she met Mark Ryder, she would ask him what he did for a living. He said he was an executive in the garment district. Little do we know, though, he was a big-time drug dealer and a connection to John Gotti. Now, as we know with Mark Ryder, the relationship with Ryder wouldn't last long because Ryder in 1986 would be indicted alongside people like Gene Gotti in a drugs trial. To this day, Mark Ryder is still in prison. He was given a several hundred-year sentence and is waged many times for compassionate release. When we look at John Gotti, we know a lot of the ends for a lot of these people come in prison. Now, Mark Ryder has been in prison for over 30 years, and he has tried to get out. And that quote, according to a family member, Ryder would never jeopardize his freedom again by running afoul of the law and risk dying in prison if he were to get out. The calls to law enforcement and to the feds have not helped. He is still in jail. Now, I do want to discuss a story yet again that Giovino tells about her relationship with John Gotti. In the documentary, in the many talks that Giovino has, she never has once said she had any romantic interests in John Gotti, but she does talk about him quite glowingly. She calls herself an associate of Gotti. I want to tell you about a story that Giovino tells and has told regarding John Gotti. According to Giovino, she was at a club in front of Gotti. She would say, quote, "I hear this woman talking about my girlfriend Margot, saying she was a slut. I said to the woman, 'Excuse me? You're talking about my friend. Keep your mouth shut.'" Now, the two women would then put Andrea, who was talking to her, on the pay no mind list and continue to badmouth Margot. Now, according to Andrea, she would then say the woman continued to talk shit. So according to her, I turned to John Gotti and said, "Excuse me, John, these women are trash talking my girlfriend." I pushed my table aside, rushed over to their table, picked up the champagne bottle, and smashed one girl in the head with it. Then I went to work on them. As I was hitting them, I yelled, "I told you to not open your mouth." When I finished hitting them, I went back to my table, and Gotti and his crew were, quote, "impressed." From then on, nobody called me Andrea. They called me Rocky. I was more stand-up than some of the guys around them. I'm just going to leave that story there. Listen, on YouTube, in this genre, we hear about a lot of wild stories. This is one of the more wild, I have to say. Do I think Andrea Giovino did this in front of John Gotti? No, I do not. No, I do not. In fact, who would ever say she didn't? Who would ever say anything regarding this? Do I think she did it in front of the boss and the most powerful crime family on the planet and then was called Rocky going forward? No, I don't. However, I wanted to share this story with you. If it did happen, maybe she was tougher than some of the guys hanging around John Gotti. That said, the relationship with Ryder by the late 80s was done because for Andrea Giovino, Mark Ryder went to prison. She would then meet an individual called John Fogerty. Now, John Fogerty is someone who, if you're familiar with the mob, you may have heard of. Fogerty was a burly Irishman from Staten Island. He had a construction company. He was involved with the coke business. He was selling narcotics. He was involved as well at one point with Sammy Gravano. There have been stories that Fogerty helped in getting rid of bodies for Gravano at one point. And pretty much a lot of people knew him around Staten Island. The one thing that we would know about John Fogerty is that, again, Andrea Giovino was smitten by a criminal. And for her, she again realized dollar signs. She wanted to live the high life. And John Fogerty, by this point, could provide her with that. The two would live on a beautiful home on the waterfront in Staten Island. She was able to, again, afford the great things life has to offer due to the fact that Fogerty was a high-level drug trafficker. He was messing around with a lot of bad people, but in that turn meant money. It didn't matter that people like Sammy Gravano were cold and callous killers. John Fogerty fit right in. Was he a mobster? No, because he was Irish, but he was definitely a mob associate. And for Andrea Giovino, she didn't really care. The issue is when you are a mob wife, which I guess we could call her, you have to start kind of towing the line a little bit. Do you want to be a complete imbecile and not realize that nothing's going on with your husband like some do? I guess you can play stupid. But the one thing Andrea Giovino starts doing is regularly engaging in criminality as well. Now, one of the people that Giovino starts to do business with alongside Fogerty in drug deals is her brother, a person called John Silvestri. Now, Silvestri acted as a collector. He was someone that kind of acted as muscle alongside John Fogerty. At one point, Giovino on a wiretapped conversation would tell her brother, quote, "Tell them we'll rip their fucking heads off," in reference to owing money for drugs. So listen, whether or not we want to believe Andrea Giovino did certain things in front of people like John Gotti, there are wiretap conversations where she had possibly at one point was engaged in selling narcotics or involved in the narcotics trade. Essentially a Karen Hill type, if we're being honest. We're talking about a film like Goodfellas. Eventually, as we know, in the world of crime, the mafia, organized crime, whatever you want to call it, it didn't help that their phone in Staten Island, the Giovinos, was tapped. And for Fogerty and Giovino, they would all be indicted in the summer of 1992. For Andrea Giovino, she would face a very difficult decision. Now, I want to get into, according to CBS.com, federal agents would raid their home one morning, and the feds would eventually tell Giovino that she was, quote, facing 10 years in prison, and they made her an offer. Giovino would tell them, quote, "Was I afraid of prison? No. I knew I could survive in prison, but I don't want to leave my kids. I did not want to leave my kids, so I felt I'm going to use what I know. I'm very smart. I'm going to tell the truth." Now, Andrea Giovino would also say at one point that her main focus, again, was her kids, and that, quote, "I wasn't being no stand-up person for any of those scumbags." So what would she do? She cooperated. And so would John Fogerty, and so would her brother, John Silvestri. John Fogerty is still in witness protection, as far as I know. Now, John Silvestri, I don't really know whatever happened to him, but it really doesn't mean much to this discussion. Andrea Giovino would, according to multiple reports, including the Philadelphia Inquirer, be given $75,000 and put into the program herself. Today, she lives in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Now, in her relationship with John Fogerty, she would have a daughter, a girl called Brittany Fogerty. Now, Brittany Fogerty may be someone you have seen before. Fogerty would be featured in season 6 of the VH1 series Mob Wives. Here, Fogerty in the middle of the photo can be seen with Karen Gravano on the left, Carla Facciolo on the right, as well as Renee Graziano. Now, Fogerty, surprisingly enough, just like most of the people on the show, Mob Wives, was not a mob wife. She wasn't even really a mob daughter. She was just someone who, at one point, was involved in a show that featured people whose husbands or boyfriends may have at one point been involved in criminality. Now, I do want to end this with an interesting point. In the death of Big Ange Raiola, who I guess if we could say the most serious of the people involved in mob wives who were actually in the streets, Big Ange Raiola was the real deal. She was a very likable person. In 2016, she would sadly die from cancer. According to multiple media reports, Brittany Fogerty and her mother, Andrea, were barred and banned from the funeral. Now, it's a question as to why. According to reports, it was some of the things that her father, John Fogerty, had engaged in 20 years previously. The question I have is, if you're going to ban Brittany Fogerty from the funeral and you have an issue with informants, should Karen Gravano be there? Kind of a question I have. The delusions of people involved in this world. It's always questionable. In the end, do I believe Andrea Giovino, who is now remarried again and is 67 years old? I can't say I believe everything she says. I think, like a lot of people in this genre, she has made a living off of a very small connection she had to that world. And many people have learned that in the world of YouTube and mob content, just a sliver of a connection to that world can mean big bucks for you. It's just the truth. People that have limited roles or even associated with that world have the ability to sell books, be on documentaries, and to make money of their own. Was she a gangster? Absolutely not. Was she a criminal? Yes. Was she an opportunist? Yes. That's just the truth. Did she know John Gotti? Probably. She probably met him at some point. But to refer her herself as we, to me, was just a little bit cringy. But she's, again, just like a lot of people in this genre, people that are holding on to 30 or 40 years ago, and they can sell to unsuspecting people that they knew all these people. I did actually, honestly, in episode 3 of the documentary, I actually did enjoy her commentary. I thought it was quite good. I think she told the truth about a lot of these people. If you haven't, I highly urge, check out Get Gotti. You can find it right now on Netflix. There are a lot of goofy people on YouTube that will tell you it isn't any good. But if you enjoy mob content, I think it's really solid. I think episode 3 was really good. I think it really tells the tale of the phoniness of that life and what happens in the end for the people that are involved with it. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, what do you think of Andrea Giovino? And what do you think of Get Gotti? Let me know in the comment section below. We'll see you next week here on this.